Hello students, welcome to my Abhyas. I am Suparna and here we are with the next session of second PUC first chapter biology. In the previous sessions we have discussed about what is reproduction, different types of reproduction, and we also discussed in detail about the modes of asexual reproduction. We also started with sexual reproduction in organisms. Now, as I told you before also, this chapter is a common introduction to all the remaining chapters which is going to come forward for your next two units actually. So what happens, in this chapter we're going to talk commonly about all the reproduction techniques of plants, animals as well as microorganisms. Now we are actually in the discussion of fertilization or syngamy. Before going to the fertilization technique, let us just overview what we have discussed before. In the previous session, we have discussed that life cycle of an organism is divided into three phases. That is juvenile phase or the childhood. Then comes the reproductive phase when the organisms are reproductively active. And the third stage is called as sentient age or the old age, which leads to death. Now, in the juvenile phase itself, we have the different types of growth hormone which is released, and that helps a plant or an animal to grow to a required height. They attain the maturity and the flowers will be blooming in the plant, and in case of animals, we see different type of cycles which they follow for the reproduction process. In the previous session, we also discussed in animals that is a clear differentiation is there in primates and non-primates, in mammals. How do they reproduce? How do a mammal reproduce? There are two different type of cycles. One is called as oestrus cycle and the other one is called as menstrual cycle. We have discussed that non-primates follow the oestrus cycle. That is why they are called as seasonal breeders. Whereas the primates like monkeys, apes and humans follows the menstrual cycle and they are called as non-seasonal or continuous breeders. Now we also discuss the events of fertilization. So the fertilization event is divided, or the whole reproduction in an organism is divided into three phases. What are those three phases? Those three phases were, the first one was pre-fertilization event. Pre-fertilization event. Then comes the second event, that is fertilization. Second event is called as fertilization. And after the fertilization, the third events or the set of events which follows after the fertilization, those comes under post-fertilization event. Now, during the pre-fertilization events itself, there is a growth and the required enzyme and hormone secretion takes place. There, the juvenile phase of the organism ends and they enters to the reproductive phase, and that is the fertilization stage. What happens during this stage? During the fertilization stage, the organisms are reproductively active. They can produce gametes. Now, why I am telling you gametes over here? Because we are discussing about sexual mode of reproduction. In sexual mode of reproduction, there are two gametes which is produced. Now, again, I'll recall which I discussed in the previous session, that gametes can be looking similar. They are called as isogametes. The gametes can be looking completely different than each other, and they are called as heterogametes. So I hope you remember that homogamous and heterogamous, the gametes, when they look similar to each other, they are called as homogametes. That, as we see in the example in Chara, that is in the algae. And we also see in human, for example, the egg is bigger in size, whereas the sperm itself looks completely different, which is motile also. So these are the heterogametes. So all these things we have discussed in the previous session. I hope you have gone through all those videos and you have understood it very clearly. Now in this session, what we are going to discuss? In this session, we are going to discuss about fertilization or syngamy. Let us see what is fertilization or what is syngamy. Fertilization is the fusion of haploid male and haploid female gamete. What is fertilization? The definition says that it is a fusion. It is a combination of a haploid male and a haploid female gamete to form a diploid zygote. This process is called as fertilization, or it is also called as syngamy. Now, what is happening over here? There is a haploid male gamete. Haploid means, what is the meaning of haploid? The ploidy, or the number of chromosomes present in that particular gamete, is N. Okay, so there is a haploid male gamete, and there is also a haploid female gamete. Okay, there is a haploid male gamete and a haploid female gamete. Okay, so what is the chromosome number over here? In both the cases, the chromosome number is N. N means they are already gone through a reductional cell division. Now, what is reductional cell division called as? A reductional cell division is called as meiosis. Okay, so remember, in this process, when we talk about fertilization, a cell need to undergo meiosis to reduce its chromosomal number. So what happens during meiosis? During meiosis, the 2n number, or the diploid chromosomes, get reduced to haploid number, that is n number of chromosomes. Got it, right? So now let us recall the definition one more time, and I hope this time you will be able to understand it very clearly. The process of fusion of haploid male and a haploid female gamete to form a diploid zygote. Okay, so there is a fusion of a haploid male combining with haploid female gamete, and what they are forming? They are forming a 2n number of chromosomal cell, a new organism, and that we call it as zygote. Okay, now this zygote now will further grow by the process of mitosis, and there will be cell differentiation, and that particular zygote will form a new organism. It is same for both male plants and animals. It is also seen in some algae and some funguses also. So sexual reproduction is a process where there is a fusion of a male and a female gamete. That is very important. Remember this. And the haploid number of chromosomes are combining to form a diploid number of chromosomes. Now, development of an egg into a new organism without fertilization is called as parthenogenesis. Here is one more definition with this fertilization. What is the definition? That is parthenogenesis. Now, what is parthenogenesis? Parthenogenesis is a process where an egg can develop to a new organism without fertilization. This happens to a sexually reproducing organism. Make this idea very clear in your mind. Okay, parthenogenesis is something like a asexual mode of reproduction only, but this happens to a sexually reproducing organisms also. What happens in this case? In this case, an egg is developing to a new organism without fertilization. Got it, right? That is parthenogenesis. So when an egg, without any fertilization, without combining with the male gamete, if it gives rise to a new organism, that means from the egg, if we get a new organism, then this process is called as parthenogenesis, and it is seen in case of animals in male honeybees, in turkeys, and in rotifers. So here are some examples what we have seen over here. As you can see, so the male honeybees, you can see it in this photo, that male honeybees and the turkeys will be following this process of parthenogenesis. That means without the fertilization also the organism can give rise to a new organism. What about in plants? I'll tell about in plants as well. This is the example of turkey, which also reproduces. They may egg without fertilization can form a new organism. Okay, I hope you got this. So what are the two definitions we have learned from this? We have learned from this that there are two processes. There are two ways by which one organism can reproduce, and sexually reproducing organisms. The general process is the formation of a zygote, that is a fusion of a haploid male and a haploid female gamete. The other process is when an egg automatically forms, or a mature egg automatically forms to a new organism, and that is called as parthenogenesis. Okay. Now we have the next category of example when we talk about fruits. Now in case of fruits, if a ovary develops into a fruit directly without any fertilization, then that is called as parthenogenesis, and the fruit developed in this process are called as parthenogenic fruits, and this process is called as parthenocarpy. You will be finding out the grapes which are seedless, right? You have seen grapes, or you have eaten grapes which doesn't have any seeds. So grapes and banana are those commonly used fruits which is produced by the process of parthenogenesis. So this topic about parthenogenesis we'll be discussing again in the next chapter. That is when we'll be talking about sexual reproduction in flowering plants, as well as when we'll be talking about in human reproduction also. I'll be explaining this process again. As I told you, the first chapter is a common introduction of the next few chapters. That is why we are discussing all these together. Okay. So what is fertilization? Fertilization is a fusion of a male and a female gamete, and if an egg or an ovary develops to a new individual without any fertilization, then that is called as parthenogenesis, and that process is called as parthenocarpy. Let us go to the next one. Okay. Now, how many types of fertilizations are possible? As I told you, fertilization is a fusion of a male and a female gamete. Now, what are the processes by which method this fertilization can take place? There are two ways of fertilization. One method is called as internal fertilization. The other method is called as external fertilization. So, depending on where exactly the fertilization is taking place, we can divide it into internal fertilization, and we can also divide it into external fertilization. Okay. Now, by this, I hope you can understand. If I say this internal fertilization and external fertilization, one idea comes in your mind, right? Internal means inside the body of the organism. External means in the external environment. Okay. Now, what happens in this case? Let us talk about the first one, that is internal fertilization. During internal fertilization, basically the terrestrial animals, they go for this process, that is internal fertilization. The male gamete is inserted into the female body, or the male gamete is released inside the female body, and that is called as internal fertilization. Then what happens in external fertilization? During external fertilization, this is basically seen in aquatic organisms or aquatic animals. It is also seen in amphibians and fishes. Okay. Aquatic organisms, let us give an example. I can give example of fish. Also the amphibians like frogs. Okay. How do they reproduce by external fertilization? See what happens, both male and female gametes are released in a common medium, that is in the water. Basically, aquatic organisms are following this. So what they do, they release the male gamete as well as the female gamete in the water surface, or in a environment where there will be a wet environment. It may not be always water, but there may be some wet environment. There they will be releasing almost at the same time. So that what happens, this outside the body of the organism, there will be a fusion. Now in this process, the external method are not so successful ones, and to avoid that, to have a greater rate of success, the number of eggs are produced in large number. They will produce a large number of eggs. Whereas in case of internal fertilization, the chances of a survival of a zygote or the successful fertilization is much more higher compared to the external one. Because what is happening in internal fertilization? The male gametes are getting inserted in the female body. So they are already in the safe environment. So there is a high chance of the zygote to develop. Whereas in the external environment, they are in the water, right? So there are a lot of other organisms, there are other fishes, there may be small animals, or planktons are there, they will be eaten up, or they may flow in the water itself, right?